Hello YouTube, welcome back. Now it's not what you're thinking. I haven't put in a new driveway to Nutkin Farm. This is in fact the old Tudor gatehouse here in Parramatta, leading towards Old Government House. And it's a not well-known fact that the first tree changer in New South Wales, Australia, was in fact the Governor of New South Wales. Parramatta is, for those of you who don't know it, a city within Sydney, in the west of Sydney, a long way from where the First Fleet landed and colonised the coastal areas of Sydney. The Governor came inland to get away from the cesspit that was the Sydney CBD at the time, and created Government House out here. And it was Governor Lachlan Macquarie in particular who built this beautiful parkland, which had some farms and kitchen gardens and all these sorts of things, which have been perfectly preserved. The site is actually not just heritage listed locally, it's got a World Heritage listing. And if you ever do come to Sydney, or if you live in Sydney and haven't visited, I strongly recommend it. The inside of Government House is quite extraordinary. They've managed to model it pretty much as it was built around the turn of the century in about 1800. And we're just coming up on part of that now. Not a big grand castle like you would see in Europe, but definitely dating back to the late 1700s, early 1800s. So there, your first tree change. The first governors of New South Wales, after having had too much of the big smoke, came out to a farm property. I moved my professional practice out to Parramatta too after I became a barrister in 2011. Lucky thing I did too, because before that I worked on Pitt Street, and calling people a Pitt Street farmer was a pejorative way of making fun of Sydney people who owned a farm in the country. So I managed to avoid complying to that stereotype perfectly by coming out here. And this is a lovely place. Anyway, work's kept me in Sydney for a bit, but there's a topic that sort of brought me back to doing a video and having a chat with you guys that sort of can't wait. And it's a bit of recent angst about our professional association, the Australian Macadamia Society. It's been doing a bit of navel gazing in the past couple of years, and with the change of CEO and that sort of thing, they're sort of looking at the whole organisation. But the kind of things they've been looking at, such as a membership structure and who should pay what for a membership, might be missing the point a little bit. And I'll come to it this way. Our society is what's called an industry body. That is, everyone involved in the industry has a right to membership, and there's supposed to be benefits from collaboration and working together and that sort of thing, so that all of the members benefit. And that's fine up to a point, but the collaboration, the win-win that we get from working together, is only a win-win when everybody is making a profit. And in recent times, where the macadamia price has crashed below the cost of production, that isn't true anymore. We have on one side the growers who are losing money and not being properly reimbursed for their crop, and on the other side the processors or the handlers of the crop, who at any given price can make money. And the best way is to give you the simplest possible example of that, and that is if the macadamia price is $2 and the processor sells it for $2.20, they make 20 cents profit. If the macadamia price is $5 and they sell it for $5.20, they're still making 20 cents profit. So in good or bad times, the nut processors can still make money. There's no denying that when the price is high, they'll make more money, but they can still make some money. Now, if we go to the issue of what's causing macadamia prices to be low, you can't blame the nut processors for that entirely. There are world price drops all over the place, and there's a world supply and demand. We don't operate on an island here in Australia. We all get that. However, there are local market concerns, and it's a bit naive to suggest that the processors have nothing to do with it, particularly when they seem to move very close to in unison with each other when it comes to issues like pricing and conditions that they put on the condition of supply. So when we reach that point where some people in the industry are making a profit and others aren't, we then have this sort of difficult question to resolve, and that is, should we really be in the same association? The processors do have their own association, which is the Australian Macadamia Handlers Association, but they're also allowed into the Australian Macadamia Society, and that's causing some repercussions that I think are at minimum unhelpful and at worst outright concerning. I had my own experience of this a couple of years ago when I was making a video talking about the various prices offered by the macadamia processors, and those videos are up on my channel. If you're a regular subscriber, you'll have seen them. I wanted to put that data up on the Australian Macadamia Society's Facebook page so that I could go through the fine print. I mean, I am a lawyer, I'm good at that sort of thing, and offer the various choices to the growers, not giving any recommendation as to who was good and who was bad, but just to put the information out there so that they could make their own comparison without having to do all the digging that I was doing in my research. So I posted that up, but the post was fairly quickly removed, and I wondered why that was. I thought, this is helpful information to growers. Why wouldn't they let growers benefit from having that comparison? And I wasn't given any explanation as to why the post was taken down. It just disappeared. After being a bit annoyed at it, I sort of thought nothing more of it. But then we got to the real price crash in the 2023 season, and things started changing. People started asking questions of the Australian Macadamia Society, and they're not always reasonable questions. People get upset, people get emotional, people will say to the society, what are you doing about the prices we're being paid? The society gets defensive and says, well, we're doing this, this and this, and we're marketing here, here and here, and all that sort of stuff. The problem, I think, that they couldn't get past is that they can blame every factor in the world for why macadamia prices are low. But they did not permit so much as a discussion about whether our nut processors here in Australia had anything to do with that. They were essentially immune from criticism, because anyone who posted something critical of a processor, the post would be removed. The industry forums steered clear of anything other than praise for the nut processors, who are often sponsors of the event. And by that involvement, both in the society and sort of financially, the growers have not been able to question or criticise any role that the processors are playing or not playing in the proper promotion of our nut. And you have to wonder whether that can mean a conflict of interest, in that, if there's an enemy, it's always something else. And the processors' movements on price are never questioned. No one looks at the conditions that they're offering growers and says, look, this is harsh or this is too harsh. And importantly, there doesn't seem to be any lobbying for growers in these times of harsh conditions. So, for example, a society that I want, when faced with an approach by the processors to heavily penalise rejects, a growers association that was there for growers alone would get in touch with perhaps the Australian Macadamia Handlers Association and negotiate on behalf of farmers, right? Not only for conditions, but also for price, perhaps for payment terms in terms of getting growers paid a bit quicker. But all of those things that would be useful to growers, particularly in a time of financial stress, aren't being done. And it seems that the processor's involvement in the Australian Macadamia Society inoculates them from any criticism of their behaviour. And it also means that these things can't be investigated because there's no official body promoting that. Okay, I raised in a recent video my concerns about the fact that for the 2023 season, all of a sudden, every single nut processor in Australia, bar one, introduced reject penalties after them being absent from pricing structures. Now, either they all coincidentally came up with that idea, which seems highly unlikely, or there was some collusion or discussion between the macadamia processors and they applied some collective force against the growers to impose conditions that they didn't like. And you can list them. There's the reject penalties, there's the delayed payment schemes, there's the fact that all the prices are now notional and that nobody's offering a fixed price anymore. It's a grab bag of nasties that all got imposed by nearly all the processors on the growers at the same time. Now, if the Macadamia Society was for growers and only for growers, you would expect them to kick back, potentially exercise our own market power as growers and make recommendations to growers about which processes should perhaps be avoided until conditions improve, and that sort of thing. We don't have that. What do other industries have? Well, you don't have to look far in primary production to see that most of the industry, most of the primary industries, such as dairy, for example, their societies are very much producer-based, and they're not allowed to have any ownership or membership of processors. Because of that difference. I mean, imagine dairy farmers fighting over the price of milk within a society where the milk processors are very big players. It wouldn't happen. I looked sideways at the Pecan Growers Association in New South Wales, and it's clearly a growers association, although they're very loose on membership. It seems like you can become a member of that society just by liking the taste of pecans. So that's not a great example. But in most of the examples you see, the main society for, growers of a crop tends to be a growers association and not a whole of industry association. And like I mentioned earlier, obviously the processors do have their own association already. That's the Australian Macadamia Handlers Association. So what should the Australian Macadamia Society do? Because I think particularly in these times, macadamia growers need a voice for them, and I mean specifically for them, to promote their interests as growers. So, I know, and you read in the quarterly bulletin, which again, is subject to very strong editorial control. You read in the quarterly bulletin that, the CEO of the AMS goes overseas together with representatives of the nut processors, and together they work on opening new markets, and they work on lobbying government and getting free trade agreements to include nuts and that sort of thing. And all of that is a win-win. And, it helps the processors sell their nuts. It obviously then generates demand for the growers' nuts. There's a true example of concurrent interests. But what I'm not convinced about is why the growers and the processors need to be in the same society in order to achieve that. Collaboration on things we agree about is always possible. But what I'm worried about is the ability of our representative body to question how the processors are treating the growers. And as part of that, a second part of that is by having the processors as part of the society, effectively their behaviour towards growers is being whitewashed or officially sanctioned by the Australian Macadamia Society, because there is no one to hold them to account. There's no one to exercise collective power on behalf of the growers, even though the growers are exercising their collective power, even though the processors are exercising their collective power against the growers. So what do we do about that? Well, it seems like, if the AMS is in its mood for navel gazing, then the particular navel they need to be looking at is who should be allowed to be a member of the AMS, and in particular, what does the AMS stand for? Do you stand for growers? Do you stand for processors? Because right at the moment, it's a little difficult to achieve both of those things. We have one part making a profit at the expense of the other, and in a way to the detriment of the other, because the prices and conditions that are being offered are not enough to receive a return. And we're still being charged a levy on all our nuts that go into the processors, and the farmers have to pay a levy that goes to the marketing of those nuts. But when we're paying a levy for the processors to benefit from in their marketing of the nuts, yet we're not getting the benefit because the price we're getting paid is at a loss, this is just incurring even steeper losses in order to give a profit to someone else. And so there is a bit of analysis of a breakdown of that sort of win-win relationship between the processors and growers. And I think over time, if you take a long-term view, even if the price crisis finishes, have a look at this mower here, even if the price crisis finishes, you might actually end up with a longer term situation that is better to have the growers and the processors as two separate societies. There are a lot of informal forums that have sprung up on Facebook and elsewhere, some of which require you to declare that you have no financial interest in any processor before it'll let you in. And people can express their views freely there. I'd like this video to also generate a little bit of discussion in terms of something that might help the Australian Macadamia Society, not hurt it, but something that might help the society consider its future and consider where its primary loyalties should lie, and then hopefully structure that accordingly. I'm going to finish now with these shots of the Rumsey Rose Garden. Roy Rumsey was one of Australia's earliest horticulturalists. His great passion was roses. He brought over roses from France and England that were fashionable over there. Funnily enough, many of them did better in Australia than they did in their country where they were raised. And to that extent, there is a little bit in common with macadamias, because here we use varieties like 816 and 849 that were rejected in Hawaii, where they were created, and then adopted here because they did so much better. And here, for example, are roses that are flowering in the absolute middle of winter, which is when roses rarely do flower. It's a pretty sight, and I have to say, also a pretty smell. If you ever do come to Sydney, do drop in at Parramatta, see Old Government House and the Roy Rumsey Rose Garden. Give you a little change from macadamias. All right, guys, that's my video for now. I'll catch you again soon from the farm, and have a good time, whatever it is you're doing.